Claire, yep, all women's issues today, starting with this on the front of La Croix. Equal pay, how to progress. Now, the statistics in here, I've got to say, are pretty bleak. Women still earning only 75 centimes for every euro here in France. The average pay gap across the EU is 16%. This is despite, the paper says, a whole bunch of laws being passed in France recently to try and even out the salary gap. There's a law which says all companies have to carry out an investigation into their workforce and publish the results so everyone can see that women and men are being paid equally, but only 45% of firms have actually done that. There's another law which says they have to be working towards having a certain quota of women on their boards, 20% in 3 years' time, 40% in 6 years' time. They're not doing very well on that either, unfortunately. There's a cartoon in La Croix which sums this up pretty well. They've got the board sitting down around a table and the CEO saying, to kind of improve the amount of women at our board meetings, I've asked Mrs. Duval to do the cleaning during the meeting, which seems a bit of a...
It's quite cynical, isn't it?
Cynical picture, exactly. But according to a report in business paper Les Echos, they might not be exaggerating all that much. They say at the current rate of progression, it might take 40 years for them to actually reach that government quota of 40% of women on boards in France.
Apparently, I was just reading earlier that there are more women in parliament in Afghanistan than there are in France. So there you go, something to think about there. So it's all a bit bleak. Do you have any positive news for us?
Well, if it's women in politics you're interested in, I'll be back at 9:50 with Stuart to do a whole little programme about women in politics. But there are some more positive news for women in general in the economy. At least in L'Humanité, they've been looking at the staff of a textile factory in the Champagne region that was due to have its production outsourced to China. But these all-female workers spent 2 years fighting the German multinational who'd bought their factory in the courts to try and stop them doing that. And they've won, the paper reports. The multinational can now not send those jobs to China. It can't lay those women off either, according to the court decision. It has to rehire them. So L'Humanité says at least some women have managed to push back hard against economic injustice. They've actually got 4 whole pages of profiles in that paper of women, really mostly low-paid women in insecure occupations, people who they say are voiceless normally, giving a voice to the voiceless, the piece is headlined. So it's people like a 56-year-old Moroccan immigrant woman who's just learnt to read and write, who's been living in France working as a chambermaid. It's the poorly paid primary school teacher, and it's also women who've really campaigned hard to achieve more rights, like the supermarket cashier who's managed to get 2 Sundays off a month for everyone in her factory, and people like that. So there's some really inspirational cases there among the bleak statistics.
And you've got an inspiring woman on the cover of Le Figaro.
Yes, Samara Ibrahim, the woman who defied the Egyptian authorities, is the headline. She was one of more than 200 young women protesters who were detained towards the end of last year by the Egyptian army and then subjected to humiliating virginity tests in prison. Now, lots of those women, the paper says, refused to even talk about it because they felt so ashamed. But she defied receiving death threats and being called a slut on TV and by newspaper columnists to take her case all the way to Egypt's highest court. And now she's got that practice of virginity tests banned there. And in fact, they're classified as a form of torture, which is all, according to Le Figaro, thanks to her campaigning. Staying in North Africa, there's another interesting piece in Libération about the state of women's rights in Tunisia a year after the revolution there. But it's not quite so confidence-building, unfortunately. The writer uses the example of that photo of a topless footballer's wife that caused a huge scandal in Tunisia to say that social mores there have become much more conservative. Before the revolution, they were quite well known for having one of the most liberal societies in terms of rights for women in the Arab world. But they reckon the amount of Islamist politicians in the new government shows that rights are going backwards, and that women, at least according to the people they talk to, feel more obliged in Tunisia now to wear the veil, and they're even being pushed out of the workplace.
Now, on a much lighter note, Le Parisien looks at who does the housework these days.
Yes, and they have actually got a little bit of good news. Apparently, French women do an hour's less housework per day, on average, than they did in 1986. But it's not necessarily because their men are doing it. The paper reckons it's probably because of more technology, because now we have dishwashers and, technology that makes housework less time-consuming. But the amount that men do has only gone up by 6 minutes in those 25 years, which someone in the office just said that's pretty much a man working out how to walk to the kitchen with his plate and wash it up.
Oh, well. A little bit more is good, even if it's not very much at all. And just ending on the latest road safety agency campaign here in France.
Yes, they're betting on women being able to nag their men into driving better. Apparently 95% of lethal road accidents in France are the responsibility of a male driver, but they're targeting the new road safety campaign at women, basically hoping that they'll be able to persuade or, nag their partners into driving better. They say the problem is that men take more risks because they're too overconfident.
Problem is it's called nagging when really it's just trying to give good advice, isn't it?
Exactly, Claire.
All right, thank you very much, Elena. You're watching live from Paris, a reminder of our top story.